The country of Panama, and the canal that now defines the landscape, can trace its origins to the other side of the Atlantic. Between 1492 and 1504, Christopher Columbus explored the Caribbean Sea, discovering many islands and the South American east coast. Making his way north along the coast, he discovered the isthmus that would become Panama. In a total of 4 expeditions, he discovered the West Indies, known now as the Bahamas, the Lesser Antilles, the island of Trinidad, and then South America's mainland. This is where the story of Columbus takes a detour and we pick up our Panamanian journey. Rodrigo de Bastidas accompanied Columbus on his second trip to the New World, helping to discover much of the Western Caribbean. Upon returning to Spain, Bastidas petitioned the Spanish crown to start his own expedition. Proposing to finance his own journey, the crown agreed to his proposal. In return, the Spanish crown would receive 1/5 of the net profits his expedition would acquire. In October of 1500, with command of 2 ships, Bastidas left the port city of Cadiz, Spain. Joining him on the journey were Juan de la Cosa and Vasco Núñez de Balboa. In the spring of 1501, Bastidas discovered and named the Magdalena River in modern-day Colombia. After discovery of the Magdalena River and the Gulf of Urabá, he continued his journey north along the coast. Having suffered damage to his ship from the local environment, Bastidas was forced to retire from his journey. Bastidas reached La Punta de Manzanillo, or the Point of Manzanillo, on the upper Caribbean shore, in what is today known as Colón. Abandoning his journey and returning to Santo Domingo, Bastidas is credited with being the first European to claim the territory for the Spanish crown. After having to abandon the expedition, and his ship sinking, Bastidas was charged with treason for illegally trading with the indigenous. Forced to stand trial for the offense, he was later acquitted, retiring to a cattle ranch on the island of Santo Domingo. Just as Columbus had done for Bastidas, Bastidas would do for Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Having seen the New World while on exploration with Bastidas, Balboa wanted to embark on a journey of exploring the New World. After settling down on the island of Santo Domingo in 1505, Balboa's business ventures failed and he was consumed by debt. In 1509 he fled the island, stowing away below deck of an outbound ship. He was found midway into the trip. The captain of the ship threatened to have him thrown overboard, or left on the first uninhabited island we see. The crew threatened to mutiny, and Balboa proved himself useful. He described to the captain of his previous expeditions of the area, and was then proclaimed a useful addition to the crew. In 1509, authority was granted to colonize the northern coast of what is today Colombia. Authority over the area was divided between 2 Spaniards. Nueva Andalucía, to the east, was governed by Alonso de Ojeda, and to the west was Veragua, governed by Diego de Nicuca. The colonization was met with fierce opposition from the local tribes. Using arrows and weapons dipped in poison, they completely devastated the Spaniards' ability to take control of the land. The ship that Balboa stowed away on was in fact headed to reinforce Spanish authority over the Spanish Main. Upon arrival, Balboa and the crew led by Martin Fernández de Enciso were greeted by a war party of the local tribe. The local warriors had overrun the city and destroyed most of the improvements. Balboa suggested the city, which now lie in ruin, should be moved to the more fertile ground to the west. Upon heading west, the explorers were met by more resistance by the local tribes. The Spanish explorers proved victorious in battle and the local warriors fled to the jungle. In September of 1510, Balboa founded the first permanent Spanish settlement on the Spanish Main. Named Santa Maria la Antigua del Darien, the men prayed to the Virgin de la Antigua for victory over the natives. Upon winning, the city was founded in her name. It is here that through political ambitions and his military campaigns, Balboa made a name for himself. Establishing control over the area, Balboa would use Santa Maria as his staging point. Combating the local tribes and exploring the area, he acquired great fortunes from the local resources. During the end of 1512 and the beginning of 1513, this unquenchable thirst for riches led to squabbles between the natives and the Spanish explorers. It was during this squabble that one of the natives describes the other sea, speaking of riches beyond desire, but also of the strength of the local warriors in the area. Balboa requested more men from the local garrisons and started his journey west. Leaving out of what is today Colón, Balboa and 1,200 men headed up the Chagres River and into the jungle. Armed with hatchets and machetes, Balboa's men cut a path through dense Panamanian jungles and swamps. A distance of 50 miles, it took Balboa's men just 4 weeks to cross the isthmus to the South Sea, now known as the Pacific Ocean. Having battled two of the local tribes during the trip, and after losing most of his original force, Balboa first saw the Pacific Ocean on September 25, and stood knee-deep, proclaiming it and all its lands for the Spanish crown. With the discovery of the new territory, the town of Panama was founded. Located on the Pacific coast, it quickly grew and became of great importance. It was decided that a road was needed to connect the growing town of Panama to Nombre de Dios, a port city on the Atlantic Ocean. The road was 50 miles long, had few paved sections and limited bridges crossing the vast swamps of the Panamanian interior. During construction, the Spaniards, being few in number, took the natives captive, forcing them to work and build the road. The Camino Real, or Royal Road, found steady use for over a decade without any improvements made. Then in 1530, the Camino Real was shortened to a distance of half, now ending at the Chagres River and the settlement, Las Cruces. The Camino Real opened up the New World to discovery and conquest by the Spanish conquistadors. In 1535, it is estimated that 6,000 pounds of precious cargo, gold, silver, jewels and gems, had been transported from Panama to the treasure fleets of the Atlantic. By 1600, 400,000 pounds of treasure a year were being shipped, from Chile and Peru, to Panama, across the Royal Road, then on to meet the treasure ships of the Atlantic Fleet. Since the discovery of the Panama Isthmus, and the creation of the Royal Road, plans have been drawn to create a canal connecting the two oceans. In 1534, after discovering vast amounts of wealth on the west coasts of South America, the King of Spain, Charles V, ordered survey of the area, wanting to find the route for a canal, to ease the voyage of Spanish ships between Peru and Spain. The idea was quickly abandoned. King Charles declared, if God wanted those two oceans connected, he would have done so himself. The Spanish operated their mule wagons, and the Royal Road, until Portugal ended Spanish monopoly over trade. The Spanish would abandon the Royal Road in 1790. Then the road was given new life when gold was discovered on the west coast of North America. Word quickly spread and a mass migration was underway. In 1848, there were two popular choices: wagon ride across the country, or sail to the bottom of the world, around South America and back. Or a third option, sail to Panama, use the mule paths to cross overland, then continue by ship. This route, however treacherous it would be, was the fastest viable option. With the population growing in the new California and Oregon territories, the United States quickly realized there needed to be a shorter route between their two coasts. After surveying the land and considering a canal, the final solution was to build a railway across the country. With the direction of a New York businessman, William H. Aspinwall, and financing from both the private and public sectors, a railroad was planned and built. The railroad project began in May of 1850. The construction process would drag on for 5 long years. Previously estimated to only last 6 months, the railroad builders were accustomed to working in the mild forests of the North American interior. Bold and brazen, they were not prepared for the Panamanian jungles. The swamps were bottomless, taking massive amounts of material to fill. The bridges had to be built of either steel or stone. The original wooden structures rotted in weeks. The builders managed just 10 miles a year. In the States, this could be achieved in 2 or 3 good days. The construction, however overwhelmed with setbacks and delays, continued on, and, in 1855 the railroad opened for coast-to-coast transit. Prior to that, with every mile of completed track, the railroad sold passage. Charging by the mile, they would haul people and cargo, in and out of the jungle, and to the coastal towns. 47.5 miles of track had been laid at a cost of $8 million. Once up and running, it would become one of the most profitable rail lines in history. Charging $25 in gold for passengers and adding to these steep fares, $3 a mile for every 100 pounds of cargo. The moment the Panama Railroad became operational, the work started on a canal. In 1855, the isthmus was again surveyed, this time by William Kennish, an engineer who later published a book of his findings. Titled, The Practicality and Importance of a Ship Canal to Connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In the same year the railroad drove the final spike, at least 4 countries were considering a canal project, negotiating with the local government and trying to obtain rights. The French would ultimately win the negotiations. Having recently completed the Suez Canal, investors and the Colombian government were convinced that the French could build the canal. Acting on behalf of the committee formed by the Geographical Society of Paris, Ferdinand de Lesseps signed a treaty with the Colombian government authorizing the canal project on March 20, 1878. The treaty, known as the Wise Concessions, gave exclusive rights to the Société Civile to build the interoceanic canal through Panama. The treaty was named in honor of a French Navy lieutenant. Lucien Napoleon Bonaparte Wise, with his chief assistant Armand Reclus, performed the survey and planning of Panama. The plan, to excavate an interoceanic waterway at sea level, a project which eventually went bankrupt. Lesseps, the famous canal builder, sea level canal. Having recently completed the Suez Canal in Egypt, and grossly underestimating the Panama landscape, Lesseps proceeded forward in an attempt to dig a sea level canal. Work began on January 1, 1881. From the beginning the project was overwhelmed with problems and delays. The workforce, not being acclimated to the tropical climate, became ill quickly, many dying from diseases like malaria and yellow fever. The equipment, large steam shovels and earth movers, rusted quickly in the humid jungles. To add to the delays, Lesseps had never visited Panama during the rainy season, a time when the Chagres River can rise 30 feet in a few hours. After years of setbacks, constant delays, the Universal Interoceanic Canal Company declared bankruptcy on May 15, 1889. Work was halted on the project and a corruption scandal broke out in the French government. The true losses the canal company was facing were $287 million. Investigation of the canal company revealed chief executives had bribed politicians to hide their overall losses. The scandal that would be dubbed the Panama Affair led to more investigations and hearings on the matter. Then finally in 1894 the new Panama Canal Company was formed and all assets were transferred. A minimal workforce was hired. Their charge was to keep the project in positive condition, making very little progress. They also kept original terms of the contract. The Colombians had certain requirements of their own. The French, now bankrupt, only wanted to sell their interest in the project. After 10 years of negotiations, the Americans, using their influence in Central America, aided by the fall of Colombian control over Panama, took over the project. Buying the rights for $40 million, the Americans would own and govern a 10-mile wide buffer zone around the canal route. The United States, led by the Isthmus Canal Commission, took control of the project on May 4, 1904. Inheriting the mess the French had left behind, the American administration was directed to never mention the 15 years of the failed French performance, or the scandals that followed. There was an ill and dying workforce. The buildings had dilapidated in the jungle climate. All of the structures were now in dire need of repair. The equipment the French left behind had rusted or failed in the tropical rains. Before the work could even begin on the canal, all of the support systems had to be rebuilt. The housing, water systems, and cafeterias were highest priority, followed then by the warehouses, needed for material storage, and repair shops to keep the equipment running. In 1905, a U.S. engineering panel was commissioned to finalize the construction plans. For the first 2 years, the work on the canal project had centered around bringing the support structures back to acceptable conditions. Now that the area had been restored and was ready, a plan was needed. In 1906, the Engineering Commission presented the plan to President Theodore Roosevelt. With 13 voting members on the planning committee, the plan for a sea-level canal was sent to Roosevelt after a 8-5 majority vote. Meanwhile, work had long been underway in Panama. The self-educated engineer, John Frank Stevens, had been running the project since June of 1905. The chief engineer, John Finley Wallace, who had started the canal effort, resigned. The red tape had overwhelmed Wallace and he forfeited his position. Stevens was summoned to Washington to give testimony of the working conditions in Panama. Stevens had been through 2 rain seasons and had seen the Chagres River in full flow, giving vivid accounts of the waters that rose 30 feet in 4 hours' time. It was Stevens who declared the sea-level approach an entirely untenable position, claiming that a lock and lake system, as originally proposed by French engineer Baron Gaudin de Lepinay, was the only way to cross the continental divide. Ultimately Stevens succeeded. He convinced Teddy Roosevelt, and with him, the committee members. One of the first achievements Stevens had in Panama was his rebuild efforts of the facilities. With help from sanitation's officer, William C. Gorgas, practices were implemented and the spread of tropic diseases like malaria were contained. Within the first 2 years, through Colonel Gorgas' direction, most of the mosquito-spread diseases were eliminated. With the tropic diseases under control, and the facilities in order, Stevens started a campaign to attract more workers. Requests were sent to the states and abroad. In total the canal project employed more than 40,000 workers over its 10 years of construction. With the workforce in good health and good spirits, Stevens charged forward. Stevens successfully oversaw the project for 2 years, organizing the construction efforts and supplying it for the foreseeable future. As the construction crept forward, the old equipment left by the French was used up by the Americans, replaced by larger, better-suited equipment from American suppliers. In all there were rail-mounted steam shovels and cranes, hydraulic rock crushers and concrete mixers. For the swamps and existing waterways, dredges were shipped in and used. When Stevens resigned in 1907, his successor, Major George Washington Goethals, from the Army Corps of Engineers said, "He was so well organized, all we have to do is show up and let his plan unfold." The construction of the Panama Canal was completed on January 7, 1914, demonstrated by a ship crane used during the build. It had started its journey in the Atlantic Ocean. Building its way through, it finally sailed out of the canal and into the Pacific Ocean. The first ship to transit the Panama Canal from ocean to ocean was the SS Cristobal, making the journey on August 3. The canal officially opened to traffic 12 days later on August 15, 1914, 2 years ahead of schedule and costing the United States $500 million. In total, the project called for excavating 45 million tons of material, some of which was moved to build and backfill the different dams, levees and breakwaters. It employed 75,000 workers and used over 1,000 pieces of heavy equipment. The Panama Dam project at that time was the largest construction project overseen by the United States government, and to this day, one of the largest in the world. From the formal marking line of the Atlantic Ocean, to the harbor marker on the Pacific side is 50 miles. It takes an average 11 hours to transit the canal from ocean to ocean. The largest ships to transit the canal are known as panamax vessels. A panamax cargo ship typically has a deadweight tonnage of 65,000 to 80,000 tons, but its actual cargo is restricted to about 52,500 tons, because of the 42-foot draft restrictions in the canal. The longest ship ever to transit the canal was the San Juan Prospector, a bulk oil carrier that is 973 feet long with a beam of 106 feet. Initially, the locks at Gatun were designed to be 94 feet wide. In 1908, the United States Navy requested for an increased width. At least 118 feet was needed to allow the passage of U.S. naval ships. Eventually, a compromise was made and the locks were built 110 feet wide, accommodating most of the fleet at the time. Each lock is 1,050 feet long, with the walls ranging in thickness from 49 feet thick at the base to 10 feet thick at the top. In 2020, an estimated 14,000 ships used the canal and were charged tolls and fees exceeding $2.4 billion. The Panama Canal has been under Panamanian control since 1999. Prior to that, the United States had sovereign power over the 10-mile-wide canal zone. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment and subscribe to see our newest videos. Until next time, enjoy your fun facts.